Hi.
Good evening. I want to call to order this budget work session. Tamika, would you call the roll?
Sure will. So I'm just writing the time. Ms. Boucher.
Here.
Ms. Campbell.
Here.
Mr. Cotton.
Here.
Ms. Hastings.
Here.
Ms. Higgins will be here maybe. Mr. Richards.
Here.
Ms. Robinson.
Here.
Ms. Walsh.
Here.
And I am here. We have a quorum.
Right. This is an open session, which is so we don't have a super formal agenda. We have some outstanding questions that I think the superintendent or Mr. Fabrizio are going to supply some answers to. I know some board members had questions about school nurses. And passed out some information. Is Mr. Fabrizio going to present on that?
Right. I'd like to start with John, if I could, and you requested some data relative to the nursing staff and the responsibilities they have. So I asked John to put together some information for you tonight.
And I hope this is sufficient. I kind of wasn't here for any conversation. We didn't have anything about it, so I think that this is what I tried to put together off of my conversation with Superintendent Murphy.
Oh, we just have to get closer.
You can get closer to the microphone.
I am close. It's not.
Is it on?
No, actually, that helps.
Does it help? That better?
Yeah.
He turned it up.
You have to
Yeah,
eat.
he does turn it up inside the booth too.
He turned it
helps
up.
a lot.
You also have to eat it.
Okay.
Karaoke.
So one of the things that I talked about here is I gave you the minimum standards from New Hampshire and what's required. For all of you, I looked at what ratio range are out there. And again, ratios range all over the country. And, Center for Disease Control and Prevention recommends a ratio of school nurse to 750 to 1. It's what it is, and that's based on 2022. So I gave you that. Kind of who are our nurses on the next page, if you want to turn to that. It just says that we have 9 full-time nurses in our buildings. And then beyond that, we have a number of students that have that are diagnosed with a medical disability and require a one-on-one nurse. And I gave you all of those, looking at any ranging from LPNs to LNAs and even RNs if we needed. So we have 1 RN, 6 LPNs, and 3 LNAs in the district, in addition to our 9 building nurses. And then I was asked some information about absenteeism. And our nurses are wonderful, and they're here. We started the year with a real bout of COVID with our nurses. We had 7 out at one time, which was only a couple days that all 7 were out, but it was quite the bout to start the year. So beyond that, you'll see that we went through the year, and Laura Anderson, who is our ARNP and our district healthcare coordinator, is available to go in most instances in sub, or we contract subs, or we have subs on our sub list. And those are all the ones you see throughout the year, total of 55 days through January that subs were needed in doing that. And then on the next page, you'll see we will cover a nurse in a building almost always, except for when the 7 nurses were out. You'll see that some days we had difficulty because that was an anomaly that we hope we don't face again, having everyone out at once, because we need them and we value them. So, and then just some miscellaneous facts that I just pulled up. Laura Anderson's office at the high school. We purposely moved her out of this office and more building-based in the high school. That's where our most students are. We have 2 full-time nurses, but we had some medically fragile students who moved to the high school this year, and we wanted to make sure Laura based herself out of there, but she is in all buildings all the time. We have 5 substitute nurses on the list right now. 1 is a contractor and 4 district hires. As I said, Laura covers when she can. Total number of day nurses were covered were 22. Total numbers that was needed was 25. So there's 3 days when I said we didn't cover. So those 3, and then we have 20 medical professionals if you add up all of the LNAs, LPNs, and RNs. And then each building also works in conjunction with their social worker or home to school liaison that partners to help out along with the principals to help meet the needs of students. And I'm open for any questions I can answer.
I have some questions, Mr. Fabrizio.
Sure.
Just, so Laura's office is in Concord High School, but she doesn't count as one of the two nurses?
No,
Or she does?
no,
count?
she's an additional.
Oh, okay.
She oversees all nursing, all healthcare, and she can sub in when she needs to do that.
Okay.
With either students that have a disability that need a one-on-one for that, or in a building-based. Laura does both of those.
Okay, and she will cover if a nurse is out, no matter if she herself has things to do? Like if she
Yes.
has paperwork?
Yes,
and
that's
needs
a- that's
to
a
do-
priority.
That's the priority, is she needs to cover
It's a
someone.
priority.
So then how often, did I miss how often the district, the contractor is?
So you'll see on the sheet with the different bar graphs there, 6 days, 1 day, 3 days, things like that.
Yep.
You can see where Laura subbed if the school nurse was out, or we called in a sub to do that.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. And then the Runlet Middle School has two, are those two?
1.5.
1.5.
Sorry, that's my missing that data. It's 1.5 right there. 1.5, I apologize. Thank you for the clarification.
Laura, do we use Laura first, or do we go to the substitute list first?
I think it depends. I think depending on if it's a building-based and it's Laura, if Laura is not doing evaluations that day in with an IEP and with a family, she certainly may, depending on the day, try to get a sub-nurse if she can. If it's someone that's a reliable sub-nurse in doing that we know of and knows the buildings, yes, she'll reach out to them. It's her discretion. She oversees this and her discretion on that, but the majority of the times, you'll see she covers if she's available.
Sorry, I'm absorbing this as quickly as I can. Was the question asked when a nurse is unavailable and a substitute is unavailable to help a student in need? Does the principal step in with any kind of administration of medication or assisting with?
If need be, yes.
Medical
I
need.
mean, if need be, I mean, that's, when I was in a principal, I can speak to myself when I was in a principal role. Yes, that was our given if you had to. Yeah, and sometimes you're calling a parent and letting them know and informing them. You know, we've had situations where unfortunately we couldn't have a nurse on that day, and we've had to call parents and say, I'm letting you be aware of this, that we will make sure the educational assistant that's with your child stays close to home with the school nurse, and that we don't have someone available, and we've let them be aware of that.
Superintendent, did you have something to add?
Kara, the law allows us principals to administer medication, so it's very clear that they have the authority. They're one of the few in the building that would be able to do that outside the nurse. So it is part of the law that allows them to do that.
And is there documentation on how often that may occur?
Boy. You know,
Or is
it
it
can
just sort of
happen at
fly
any
by the seat of your
time. I
pants
mean,
kind of thing? Okay.
for instance, sometimes a nurse might be required to attend an IEP meeting, right? So, because there's a medical issue, the principal can cover the office. You know, I mean, that's what happens, and I don't have any documentation about how many times that happens. If a nurse is called out to the playground because there's an injury, right, and there's somebody in the office that's needing attention, then the principal can step in. And that's how they cover for each other.
Is there any data on the number of patients or students seen a day in each school? Some schools have higher needs than others.
Yes, we do have that data. That comes through Swiss, and they record everything, and we have that. I didn't bring that data. It wasn't something I was asked to bring, but I can certainly get that data.
Okay.
And it varies because we don't have, it's how it's entered. We don't have a standard criteria for how it's entered.
Okay, so
In
each
all
school's
buildings.
entering it differently?
Some people some nurses may enter it by, you know, if they've actually treated a child. Some may enter it just by the child showing up and visiting.
Okay.
So that's not standardized right now. It's not a standardized form or anything like that that would happen. So I can give you the data. It's just a number.
Okay.
It doesn't talk about severity of things. Doesn't talk about
Okay.
things like that. It's a number of people that come in the door, or in some cases, number of kids that are treated.
Okay.
Should we be standardizing that so that we have an idea about how many students people are seeing on a daily basis, so that we can determine whether or not
Depends what seeing is defined.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Somebody might need to take a look at that.
I can have that conversation with Laura. I certainly can.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, we haven't done that because I'm not like I give nurses the opportunity to do that and say what they consider a visit. Some consider a visit coming in the door. We haven't got to that point of saying you have to do it this way.
I think my thinking on this is more, are nurses going continuously throughout the day in some schools, and in that case, could they use a second set of hands versus, another school where you might only see 4 or 5 kids a day and you don't need a second set of hands? I know. So.
They're all going continuous throughout the day, I'll tell you that.
I'm sure of that,
and
but,
they are.
I'd like to, if you're seeing half of your students a day,
Mm-hmm.
you might need another body in there.
So,
Or you have to look at your structures in the building, too. So I would say
Yes.
that if there's that many kids being sent out of class,
Why, right.
we have to look at that,
Yes,
too. So it's a
exactly.
bigger,
No,
it's a
okay.
bigger
Yeah,
picture.
no,
And
I
that's
see.
why I said about I haven't got to that data to say that this is it, because there's some standardization of, we have standardization about what is some preventative health care we could do in the classroom, what are some preventative things we could do so many kids aren't sent out. You know what I mean?
I do know that at
Things
the
like
school I
that.
had experience with, the nurse was always good about putting Band-Aids in baggies, so we didn't have to send kids down for Band-Aids frequently. I think they try to do that where they can.
so if there isn't an objection, I think we have a lot of our school nurses here this evening, and if you have something to share with us, I'd like to invite a couple of you to come up if you would like, unless the board objects. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I know you've reached out, some people have reached out to a couple of board members, and if you want to, but not everyone, so if there's something you want to share.
I know when I taught at Walker School and the nurse was absent, it took like 5 people to cover that office over the course of the day.
So in the meantime, while they're coming up, I guess I'm not remembering what the questions were regarding.
Well, they
budgeting.
came from different board members,
Okay.
and so
I
people.
can just give a quick summary.
Yeah,
So
sure.
Pam asked the questions on my behalf, I think possibly on Liz's behalf as well. I got into a conversation with our own school nurse that started with a personal conversation because I happen to have what's called a frequent flyer at Abbott Downing. She just loves the school nurse. She feels safe there, and whenever she's just not feeling it, she heads to see the nurse, and she's never turned away. I'm deeply appreciative of that, and also very aware of the strain that may cause for someone who is also dealing with not only Band-Aids and bumps and bruises, but medically fragile students. So we just kind of started talking, and I thought, man, it might be worth a conversation here to just identify if we have pushed our nursing staff to the point where, even though it is a budgetary consideration, we might want to consider giving them a little bit of extra help and what that help might look like, what that might cost, and if the need is greater than, granted, any other need we have in the district, right? We have all kinds of budgetary considerations to make. So I just thought it was worth opening it up. It's not to say that everyone in the district works very hard, but I think it's worth the conversation to say, are we at the brink? We have had conversations about an uptick in medically fragile students. We've had, this is a post-COVID world, so I think it's always worth it to have a conversation about mental and physical health, not only of our students, but of the staff that are supporting them. So that's my summary.
Thank you.
So Pam asked some questions.
So, if you want to introduce yourself,
Hi, I'm Renee D'Alessandro. I'm one of the nurses at Concord High School. Could you hear me okay?
yes.
Renee D'Alessandro, school nurse at Concord High School.
Stephanie Celestin, school nurse at Christa McAuliffe.
Nice to have
It deals with my semi-frequent.
I'm Laura Anderson. I'm your healthcare coordinator for the district. Nice to meet all of you.
Nice to meet you, Laura.
And thank you for
Thank you.
being here for us. And if I may
Yes.
just say something that all of these nurses that we have behind me, I think, granted, this is only my second year in the district, these nurses are stellar. I've got to put a plug in for them because they work their tails off every single day. They work hard to take care of our students and to make sure the schools are healthy, make sure their students are healthy, make sure the staff is healthy. And I know that some of the nurses can see up to 50 to 60 students a day. I have done a lot of subbing in the district at all the schools, and there's, you know, we have students who come back to the nurse's office on a frequent occasion, and we still try to take care of them as best we can, even though they're coming back in for the same thing. And a lot of times we do have to send them home, and that's sometimes they need to be home because they are sick. But I think that I know that enrollment is going down, but that's not going to solve it won't solve the problem of how many students we have that come through each nurse's office each day. So there's a lot of ideas that we have. I'm here to support the nurses because, like I said, they are truly, I think, some of the best school nurses in this state. I really feel that way. And they're open, they're accommodating, they take great care of the kids that we have. They bring things to the table that I may not have thought of because I'm still learning this position, to be honest with you. I've learned a lot in a couple of years. I've had some great guidance, but there's still a lot for me to learn. But I also know that our sub list is dwindling now. We're losing some subs just because either they're now fully employed. One of them is now a nurse practitioner as well, and she's now working at the Veterans Center. So we're losing our subs, and so I think we have 5 right now, but there's a couple that are coming off of that list, and I fear that there might be one more coming off of the list as well.
Couple is 2 are definitely coming off the list, and you're worried about a third, just to clarify. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And what does that do? It just means that you're less prepared.
Less prepared. We would have less nurses to pick from our sub list. Certainly, it would impact if there's a nurse that needs to go on a field trip. Then it could potentially impact the field trip if we don't have a nurse sub to go. I have no problems going. There's times I've been going, but I try to find a sub first so I can stay within the district and do what I need to do to support the nurses and the students. So I'm hoping that we can rebuild our sub list, but it might take a little bit of time.
Ms. D'Alessandro, Celestin, do you?
Yes, well, thank you, Laura. I think.
Could you just speak into the
Sure.
microphone, please?
Hi. So, as one of many of the nurses in the district, I feel like it's important to hopefully review the look at the float nurse position that we had in the district. We had that a few years ago, and that position was removed. And that serves multiple purposes. That float nurse fills in for a nurse if they're out sick. A lot of times our subs are great, but there are subs. They're not available at the drop of a hat. You know, they have family, they have other responsibilities. They are available, but there are many times if you get sick in the middle of the night, you may not have a sub. And so having a float nurse position, it allows that person to fill in for that nurse. They already know the students. They already are familiar with our software system. They get pulled and just get put wherever they're needed for that day. That's a guaranteed position that we always have somebody. Obviously, if that float nurse is already booked, if somebody is having a planned surgery or if they already know that they need a day off, and that float nurse is already booked at another school, then we would obviously go to our sub list. But I think having that position reinstated would be a huge, tremendous help for the nurses, but especially for the students. I mean, telling a child that they can't go on a field trip and telling a parent, I mean, that's, to me, is a lot, says a lot. And I look at Runlet. school, looking at having a halftime nurse, 1.5 time nurses, I'm sorry. I think maybe increasing that position to 2 full-time is huge. It's a very busy school, and we're definitely saving more students in the nurse's office. And when you're one nurse by yourself and you're getting pulled for an emergency, that office is being left alone. You have to sometimes shut that door. So you might have a student with a diabetic who's having a low blood sugar. You could have a student having a seizure. So you definitely need 2 people. Like, it's a must, I feel like. It's the safety of the students, and the nurse can only do so much. So having that other person is, I think, huge, making it 2 full-time nurses.
At every school?
No, at Runlet. Okay. I'm at the high school.
Yes.
We have 2 full-time, and we had 3 things going on at once today. So if I was by myself, I don't know how that would have looked. I mean, you have 3 major things happening at once. So, and I know, that is a huge possibility at Runlet. I'm sure it's happened. So I don't work at Runlet, but I know that it's a very busy office. So I would like to support, the students and the nurses at that school as well. So, do you want to add anything?
Just to reiterate what Renee says, I agree with the whole Runlet. I know at one point they had like 5 or 6 kids with diabetes, and at Krista McCall, if I am the only nurse there, and there are times when I've had 3 kids with diabetes, and you can actually see what their glucose is on your iPad, and I had 2 at 40, and then I was called out to the recess. You have to decide where you're going to go, and heaven forbid I don't pick your child. And teachers, yes, they're trained. My principal, love her. One time I had to leave. I'm going to tell her I told this story. I had to leave field day where I have to pack up my whole office, go to the field day with everybody's inhaler, and I have like 15 inhalers, maybe 10 EpiPens, 2 students with diabetes, a couple seizures. It's fun. They love it. But when I was leaving to follow my 2nd grader with diabetes back to the school, I didn't know they were leaving early. I said, here, show me how to use an EpiPen. She's like, all right, I do this, I do this, I do this. I said to her, first of all, the kid's going to be dead. Love her. We actually don't have time to train people very much. We've talked about that for years, but I'm getting off topic. But so to think that my principal is sitting in my office waiting for the next person to come in, no, she's running around with kids. My principal will give meds. If I ask her, no problem. But most times there's an emergency going on. She's at a meeting. She's not there. That means I have to train the assistant principal, then the secretary. I mean, if everything works well, it works well. Also, to have a full-time float, I've had nurses. Every sub-nurse that I've had today, my mom passed, and I fielded about 5 phone calls from her that day because she didn't know what the student's parameters were. You can have the best laid plan, but you do not want to give extra insulin to a 2nd grader. I had to field those phone calls. It's not my first time ever. It's always a time. When I've had full-time afloat, it's still hard to manage diabetes. I cannot imagine. People will say, why can't your principal do it? Because you're going to kill a kid. I know we do our jobs well. It looks like we're doing nothing. I saw 60 kids today, gave 20 meds at least. I probably didn't write down all the kids. If you walk by my office, you think I'm not busy. Every child needs a note. It has to be a full assessment. It is documented. I contact parents through Parent Square. I run out to the playground. I run upstairs. I assess kids that have been hit by other kids. There's so much to do that people don't realize. I can't imagine how Runlet has been without 1.5. I probably wouldn't be there. I probably would have left. I know people do it because they think it's the right thing to do. They don't like to cause trouble. But I think it's a serious safety risk for students and also for kids that need mental health. A lot of times I'm like, I've seen you 5 times today. Don't have time. I got a sick kid thrown up over here. I got this and that. So I think that they're not getting, and if I could give them to the social worker, which we have a part-time, or the counselor, or whatever, but people aren't available at a drop of a hat. I mean, a lot of times you have to refer them or call the parents, and parents aren't even home. Parents don't have the right phone numbers. Parents can't pick up their kids. There are things that we're doing that are more involved. I don't know where I'm going. Anybody have any questions?
I'm just reliving my years at Walker School as you talk.
Yes.
So, I have a question on, it's for, I think part of our understanding is that we upgraded the floater position so that it floated and did other things. So I want to ask, you have a lot of responsibilities running the nursing staff, but also assessing children, making sure that we're in compliance with the IEPs. You generate revenue for the district. So how are those other activities balanced with floating?
Sometimes they don't. Most of the time they do, but it takes me away from, like helping over if I'm at the high school and I hear the walkie go off, I'm out and I go and I help the nurses in one way or another. I know I'm sorry I can't do that for all of you. Wish I could, but it does. I have at times had to miss, because I've been subbing as the float. I have had to miss some IEP 504s and things like that. It first was, I've never been a sub nurse until I started here. So I do enjoy subbing, but yet it takes me away from other duties that I need to do from the administrative point of view. And as John said, I subbed 55 days just for the first half of the year.
Yeah.
So that to me is quite a bit. And with its dwindling sub-nurse pool, I am a little concerned that I may be pulled more often than what I already have been. Granted, don't get me wrong, I'm fine with going to a school if I have to be the first one to sub or the second person to sub. That's part of what I do. And I'm fine with that, and I enjoy going and seeing the children and taking care of them. Some of them are frequent flyers. So, you just kind of see them coming through the door, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I just saw you about 15 or 20 minutes ago. I think you're okay. So, and it's not just the Band-Aids and butterflies that we give to the students. It's as Stephanie had said, we're monitoring their insulin, their diabetes, and where are they with their levels. We are making sure that we can get in touch with a parent, and some of the schools have a high population of new Americans, and so then that takes time to go through the language line. So a lot of this is very, very time-consuming for the nurses to do, but they do it because they love what they do. So,
Ms. Haynes?
This is a question or a suggestion, or both, around day-to-day, not necessarily a float nurse or having 2 full-time nurses at Runlet, which I think we need both of those things. But is it possible for us, like I know in the special ed reality, oftentimes teachers with heavy caseloads often have paraprofessional use to cover for students during meetings, or, that person. I feel like when I was at Walker 100 million years ago, that we had a paraprofessional that was assigned to the nurse's office. And so it was essentially, do you remember this? Is this before
absolutely.
you? So what I just remember is it was like a triage moment. So if the nurse had to be doing an insulin check and all of this, the para that was assigned to the nurse's office could do the Band-Aids and the baggies, and do you know what I mean? It was a staff person that knew the students and was committed to the function of the nurse's office. So you think of frequent flyers that maybe have a nervous tummy because of who knows what, and they go to the nurse's office. They don't want to, fart in their class, so they go to the nurse's office. Whatever it is, right? So, well, I'm speaking the truth, am I not? So would it make also sense just to alleviate the day-to-day stress? I hear it in your voice, Steph, and I remember watching it. And the reality in any school, but especially with little ones that can't necessarily advocate or explain, I feel like, can we do a better job of assigning support during the day? Or am I off base with that thought? This wouldn't be in lieu of other things.
So I did have, I had a child with diabetes, English as a second language, etc. And I got an NA,
Yeah.
which people confuse as an LPN, which has training.
But my thoughts would be an LNA for this type of position.
So, and in the past, I loved this woman as a person. Did she have any clue what she was doing? No. Sorry. As far as nursing, you cannot train someone
Right.
to do or assess. She could write down numbers. She wasn't sure what they meant all the time. Sometimes she got the numbers wrong. I'm just saying, for me to trust
Right.
someone who is not, I've done this, I've been here 19 years.
Yeah.
I know that that could be an option, but I would prefer to do it alone.
Okay.
I'd rather make my
See, that's
mistakes.
super helpful
But I'm not-
information
I'm
because-
not the only one,
Right.
because there are some people that have LNAs or LPNs and different people for one-on-ones.
But I was thinking more of an LNA for the office, for the nurse's office. You know what I mean? Like that person stayed. So you
In my
trained that.
experience, even like documenting immunizations
Yeah.
were all incorrect, and I had to do it again.
Yeah. So
and it
it
could
would-
be that we just haven't hired the right person, which is possible too.
Right.
I also, being the only nurse, have never really been to IEP meetings or IEMP meetings. I just don't have the coverage. So that's something, and I've never really asked someone to come over because it seems so. I'm not sure. A 45-minute task, so
Right.
usually I get updated later. But
Yeah. Thank you.
Ms. Robinson?
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is that it would be good practice of the board to examine the cost of a float nurse, how that would impact, our budget, since that's what we're talking about right now. Because what I'm hearing from our nursing staff is that you are strained, correct? And I know that we hear consistently about the incredible increase in students who are being evaluated for IEPs, a huge increase in medically fragile students. We are required by law to meet the needs of those kiddos, both federally and state. So that really is, that kind of thing has to jump the line for consideration, in my eyes, from just being in compliance with statute. So is it possible that the district, Michelle, would you be able to get us some numbers so that we could look at what it would mean to incorporate a floating nurse into this budget? Sure. Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't know if we can do 2 full-time at Runlet right in this moment, but baby steps, right? We can examine what our options are, for sure. Thanks, Michelle. I appreciate that.
Cost and benefits? Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I have one more
Ms.
question.
Boucher?
And this goes back to compliance too, but also goes back to a point that was made earlier about documentation, is that I know as a healthcare professional, I need to document very concisely every single visit of everything that went on in that visit. I assume that's the case for all of you nurses. Are you provided with documentation time in your workday? And if yes or no,
Looks like a no.
if yes or no, when do you get that documentation done?
I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the nurses are supposed to have prep time? Am I saying that correctly? I don't want to speak out of turn.
I have never gotten prep time in 19 years. We were put on the teacher schedule, and I think it's in there, but I think it's an individual principal thing, and people are afraid to close their doors because we've never done that. Would it be beneficial? Absolutely. I haven't even documented my immunizations yet, but I think people stay later. And also, if my student with diabetes and there's no sub, he doesn't come to school, and I'm the one who calls. So it's horrible.
And does that affect lunch as well? I'm assuming that also affects time.
Yeah, I mean, I know at the high school, if you're one nurse, you're not getting a lunch. It's just impossible. You eat as you go, but to take a 30-minute lunch and shut the door and not see students, that's not happening. I mean, you have a kid who accidentally ingests peanuts, and they come to your office and your door's shut, you have a huge problem. That door is always open. And if we have to go, if you're one nurse and you're getting called to an emergency, you got to call somebody to come up. We have students in there. We have medication. We don't have time to start locking stuff up. And we have kids that are ready to faint, dizzy, heart conditions. You can't leave them alone. You got to get somebody in there, and you're off to the next emergency. So lunch, no, you don't eat. You don't even go to the bathroom. So, but that's just part of what nurses do. We do what we do because we love what we do. Our priority every day is to take care of those students. That's our number one job. We do it because we love it. You know, our needs, those go to the side. So, but I mean, yeah, there are days where it would be nice to have somebody come up and help us so we can eat because, you know, teachers get 45-minute prep and they get a 30-minute lunch, and people wonder, you know, sometimes like, well, yeah, what's going on? It's like, well, I haven't gone to the bathroom and I haven't had anything to eat. So, yeah, but that, I think people just don't, they just think of nurses as in a different category, which we are, but it's written in our contract that we get the 45-minute prep, but nobody ever gets it. Just, no.
Any other questions? Well, you've given us lots to think about. Appreciate you coming. We're very proud as a district to have the School Nurse of the Year 2 years running, so congratulations to all of you. And thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming up last minute. Really appreciate that. I know you weren't prepared. Surprise.
Surprise. Well, you're all here,
Yeah.
so we might as well talk.
Might as well take your insight, yeah.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Superintendent, I think you had some other follow-up things for us.
I do. So one of the other issues that you asked about, I think at our last session, was around our SRO, and you wanted some data. So we prepared some data to share with you, and I also asked Jay and Tim to join us in the discussion tonight. If you have specific questions that relate to what happens at Runlet or to the high school. So if I could get somebody to help me with this.
Thanks
Mr.
very much for
Richard,
coming up with this. I appreciate
Dr.
it.
Herbert, would you like to join us?
Come on up.
Oh, and Quincy too, yeah, I'm sorry. Quincy,
Mr.
Quincy.
Quincy, don't you think you're gonna get out of that? I know you're gonna just,
Crossing your fingers, I know. Thank you.
Yeah, let's get to everybody.
Thank you. It is one, both of us in the hot seat, literally and figuratively.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. You're so welcome.
One is, past data and one is current data.
Past data.
Thank you.
Is there a summary?
Yeah.
So,
I'm gonna have a lot of questions on how to read this. I hope that's okay.
that's all
Hopefully
right,
you will
that's
walk
why
us
I gave it
through.
to you.
Yeah, read
It's a
this.
lot of information, that's what I worried about. We've been tracking a lot of this information for a while, as you
know.
know. So,
I know.
yeah, I do wanna say that, so I'm happy to walk you through the tools in front of you. I'm looking to make sure I have everything. So the first sheet, some of it is older data. If you start with the Concord High School and it's 2017-18, that sheet, let's start there. And then we'll work our way to 23-24 in terms of collecting the data.
Okay.
I thought it was really important that the first thing you see is the trends in terms of our demographics, right? Simply our demographics in the, we'll start with the high school, right? So if you look across at each year, you can follow the demographics. And by the way, those have changed over time. We now have multiracial category. That's new, and that we use for collecting information. So this older does not reflect that, but some of the newer data demographics does. So I thought it was important that you see what is the population, right? Because whatever happens is based on the basic population of those schools. So that's it stays pretty much the same.
ISS
So,
and OSS is
terms
in
of-
school, sorry.
Go
I was
ahead.
just going to say,
Suspension and out-of-school
in-school
suspension?
suspension and out-of-school suspension.
Okay, thank you.
So look down in the second column is where it's at least one in-school or out-of-school suspension, and it's done by the various subgroups: American Indian, Asian, Hispanic, Black, and White. for each year. Now,
Superintendent, can I
go
ask
ahead.
a quick question?
Sure.
Because I think it'll help. We've got overall demographic, okay, never mind. I answered my own question just by asking it.
Yeah.
I'm an auditory processor, thank you. Forget.
Auditory or visual?
Auditory, I have to say it in order to make it. I'm sure no one's noticed that.
Okay. No, we haven't, Sarah.
Yeah.
But it gives you a chance to compare, you know, so if I look at Asian Pacific Islander, you know, back in 1718, I'm gonna use that as an example. The 138 students represented 8% of the total school population, and numbers of students with one in-school or out-of-school, at least one, were 12 youngsters, which represented 5%, which is the total number of in-school or out-of-school. It's not the total number of students, but the total number of in-school, one-day, out-of-school, or in-school suspensions. So that's how you read it. So,
Under numbers, so I'm looking at the Asian Pacific
Yep.
Islander one that says 12 students had either an in-school or out-of-school, but it doesn't mean that's 12 different students. Could be
it could
one
be,
student
yeah,
more
it could
than
be,
once.
yeah, and you'll see that when we go through the data, you'll see in one case there were 40 incidents, but there were only 32 students. You'll see that when I
Okay.
go on to some more information,
Okay.
because one or two students may have made more than one poor choice,
Right.
but they get counted as a number, right? So that kind of gives you an idea about, as it relates to any, one of the concerns, I think, that you've talked about, and even back when we had the Discipline Study Committee, they talked about the delta between students of color and the white population. So kids brown and black versus what happens with white students, white kids. So that's why we were always kind of monitoring that to see if there was a significant delta between those, that data. If you flip to the next page, you see the same thing laid out for those same 3 years at the middle school, at Runlet. And you can see the demographic breakdown, not that much different than the high school. Might be a little bit different, but it wasn't really radically different. Then you look at the numbers down below with students serving one in-school or out-of-school suspension. That varies a little bit. Just remember now, Concord High School is 1,400 students, and the middle school was about 850. So you're talking less students, so one would hope that you saw less numbers when you were looking at the data, which makes sense, and is the case. And, you know, you look at like 17, 18, whoops, I'm sorry.
No, please finish your thought, I can ask after.
Yeah, 17, 18, if you look at the students with at least one in school, and you look at the 25 students of color representing 20% of the infractions, right? So that's high. But my issue is I don't know how many repeat offenders are in that number. So, but those were numbers of incidents, if you will.
So my question is.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, as I'm looking through, I know that, and thank you, Dr. Herbert, for really pressing on restorative justice as an avenue for students to address conflicts within the district. I'm noticing that over these, and this is old data, so the new stuff is gonna show us
I have
something
new
different.
stuff coming.
Which is great, I'm looking forward to seeing that. What I am seeing in the elementary school numbers is a significant decline in, at least for marginalized students, a decline in the use of, or the experiences of ISS or OSS. So my question is, what disciplinary actions were taking place as opposed to utilizing an in-school suspension or an out-of-school suspension? What kind of interventions were replacing that? Because I strongly doubt that all of a sudden behaviors just got better because the issues still exist that would create behavioral
Sure.
outbursts.
But maybe a student has a detention is more likely to happen at an elementary level than it would at the high school or middle school. Or the likelihood of loss of a privilege. Now, we know that we have a new policy that frowns upon taking away recess, but you remember in our discussion, there are occasions when a student, because of inappropriate choices, will lose their recess. So there are those kinds of options. Plus, when it's a little different when you're 9 or 10 years old and you call home. There's a little bit of a
impact.
There is a bigger impact that perhaps is a little bit more meaningful to a youngster than it is to the high school or middle schooler. I will say, Sarah, that our elementary principals are most interested in the restorative justice. And because we've been focusing on the high school and middle school, we've had less focus there, although some of our teachers have been attending the restorative justice training. So we know that there's a high interest, the principals are really interested in pursuing that. So I'm hoping we see that play out over the next few years.
Yeah, I know that it's already being adopted as a cultural expectation within our elementary schools. Like,
Right.
even in my own experience in my home, my kids expect that if there is a conflict within a friend group, that there is everyone face to face, there is acknowledgement of harm. So it's working, the trickle down is happening, but
And that's one of the tools that Quincy uses when he goes out, and as I think I shared with you, he's working in the elementary school
Yes.
too, as well as middle and high, but that's what strategy he's using.
Absolutely. So I think, just to clarify, my question is, if we're not using in-school suspensions or out-of-school suspensions, is it really just kids getting detention instead in these, what's reflected in these numbers? Because see the numbers going down. Just
Right.
wondering if there's a different
If I'm a
approach.
if I'm a junior in high school and I get a suspension, I go home, mom and dad isn't staying home from work.
Right.
But if I'm in second grade and I get out-of-school suspension, then mom and dad, somebody has to stay home. And so the likelihood of our principals making that decision
Is less and less.
is far
Okay.
less.
Thank you. I appreciate
Can
that.
you, go
Yeah,
ahead.
it could also be level of offense. So,
Yeah.
some things that an elementary student would do, well, some things that like a middle school student would do, an elementary school student would never think to do. So.
Yeah. Thank you.
So the next
humoring.
section in the packet that I gave you will give you this is an interesting report. This is the one that I talked about, the number of incidents. It's called the Arrests and Protective Custody Incidents over 3 years. Everybody with me? I'm just looking, make sure, yeah? Okay, so, there were 32 students involved in 40 incidents over those 3 years, where it actually was an arrest or protective custody. Now, I want to define what protective custody is. We talked with the police officers. I think Tim and Jay could elaborate further. But it's when a student needs to be escorted, maybe for hospitalization. We also have had times when the court sent an officer to get a student. Those are kinds of protective custody. It's not something that Jay or Tim do in terms of when a police officer is involved. I guess I'll let you expand a little bit,
Yeah.
Tim.
So a protective custody could be a hospitalization due to fear of self-harm requested by a parent. Oftentimes when those transports are done, it's documented as a protective custody because that's the way the police document their interactions, or they're having to report to the school and have an incident. They have to, their way of documenting it is through these protective custody like documentations. They would escort drive the student essentially up to the hospital for an evaluation where parents met. This is not done without us communicating with a parent. More often than not, in these situations, we're able to get a parent on site and have that happen, the transport go with a parent. And very seldom cases do we have to use the police for that, but we do have to at times do that. In addition, anytime there's a documentation of arrest, again, going back to that what I said earlier, it's their way of documenting an incident at the high school or at RMS or at any school for that matter. It's not necessarily an arrest ever occurs. In many cases, they pull out a case number. It's filed as a police, event at the high school, but there may be no consequences for students. It may have been a conversation more so with the adults on site to ensure that we have things under control and if the assistance is there if needed, but it's documented as police came to Concord High School, an incident occurred. Very seldom are we sending people away with the police. In fact, this year we've only had one protective custody incident. And I think that speaks to the measures that we've taken with our MTSS systems of supports and the other key community community partners we have in our building with our social workers, Riverbend, et cetera. We're able to, key in on students' needs ahead of time and be more proactive than we've ever been in the past. So I think that's a key understanding of those numbers. That you'll see them, you should see a trend of them going down, but just keep in mind an arrest or a document of a police incident at the high school doesn't necessarily mean there was an arrest. A transport doesn't mean a student left in cuffs in the back of a police vehicle. It very well could be a parental court request to get a student somewhere so they could get advance assistance on something that they were struggling with.
If you flip the page on that particular, the arrest and protective custody sheet, flip it onto the back side, they'll also give you an idea of what the disposition was of those incidents in a little bit more detail relative to it. I think it's just good information. And also, what does it mean when it's released to the parent, so that you understand what happens. And, I do know that in every case, the parents are called so that they can be there. Also broke those down into race of those 32 students that, so that you saw the percentage based on the 4 demographic areas that we have listed.
May I ask a question?
Question? Yeah, go ahead.
During the years 2018, 2019, 2020, was there an SRO at the high school? How often did they participate in what's documented here? Like,
Here it says that,
did I miss it?
it said on this disposition, so the SRO became involved with the student. And that was the
So
only time
2.
it mentioned.
So only 2?
No, just one.
Oh,
It's what it looks like.
okay.
Um,
I know, sorry.
Do you,
Well,
The disposition.
so I just mean, like, we have
Last other? Oh, I don't think
between the
that's
years
just-
2018 and
it's just
2020, we had 40 incidents. Not all resulted in arrests, but I understand your
And
point.
and that could, and in 40 incidents occurred at 170 Warren Street, Concord, New Hampshire.
Yep.
All 40 incidents did not occur during school hours.
Okay.
It could be a call to Concord High School for an alarm at 1:30 a.m. and it could be an individual trying to enter our building, and that's an incident at 170 Warren Street that gets reported as Concord High School.
So I guess my question is, and I think what the VP was doing her best to answer is, because we're talking about an SRO position, how does the SRO interact with all of this data? Do you feel that the number would be higher if you didn't have your SRO? Do you feel the SRO plays a critical role in the data that we're seeing?
So the data around the arrests, and I'm speaking from my experience at Concord High School over the last 5 years. The data around arrests is very seldomly your SRO. The SRO is not there to do my personal security for the building, not there to do my discipline. They're not there for if a student is having an outburst or being disorderly. That's what you pay me, you pay my assistant principals for. That's why we have counselors, social workers, LADAC counselors, for a variety of different things that can come up. The SRO is our community partner who's at the table to help us in the areas of expertise we don't have. Whether it's, accessing the crisis center for New Hampshire, whether it's helping us understanding what resources may be available to a family beyond our educational background. We might not know this, but they're part of ACERT teams, etc. So they have a an extensive trauma-informed practices, training, and awareness of those services in the community that we just don't have at the school level because it's not something that we're engaged in every day. So with that being said, the SRO, are they involved in some of these? We could figure out the data. I think when we originally ran this data, it might have been 19 to 20 incidents that they were involved in, and just so happened to be they were the officer there, and the bulk of them were protective custody transports. But those others were, a number of them outside the school. They had no connection with school or the functioning of the school. Some of them were accident reports. I don't know if, or incident reports. Yeah, that again, not necessarily anything that had anything to do with a Concord High School student or impact education of a Concord High School student. And I guess ultimately the thing is, arrests or incidents are going to occur at any building that has 2,000 people in it, majority of the, 5 days a week.
Yeah.
The reality is the SRO is, they're there as a community member to support students, support the educational mission of the building, to be a resource for us in areas of expertise we don't have. They're not there for the arrests.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you for that
Yeah.
clarification.
Just to add to that, so after our last meeting, I just, as I would normally, just went to Paige's office at the high school and just asked her a couple questions. Couple of things that I just wanted to throw on top of that is, so when patrol folks show up, like to run like we spoke about last time, those are documented as arrest reports just automatically. That's what they are. When it's an SRO related thing, that is documented as an offense report. They're two totally different things altogether. The offense report can result in like a needs assessment, for instance. Arrest reports, those can immediately result in a ticket of some kind, a court summons of some kind. Whereas SROs, for that, they have 3 levels, which goes from like warnings, meetings, assignments, things of that nature for the exact same offense, that if it was just a patrol person, they would automatically just say, here's your ticket, this is now documented as an arrest report. Whereas it could have just been a conversation, let's do some counseling, let's do a program, let's do something. But that's just how it automatically needs to be documented for their system. SROs have a different system that does it differently. So it's something to think about.
That's very helpful to know too, thank you.
Yep.
Does the SRO have the capability to issue an arrest report or record, or do those points of diversion come first?
Those points of diversion come first.
Yeah, and I think our MOU actually states that they will not arrest a student at Concord High School. I mean, if something were to cross a criminal line, it would be something that's referred over to the juvenile, juvenile department, so to speak, of the Concord PD, and would go through juvenile detective services, because we want our SRO to be a resource for students. We do not want them to be seen as the person who's looking to make an arrest at the high school. And I think it's important to emphasize they're there as an educational resource for our school and our ability to provide that, meet the diverse needs of the students we have in our classrooms today. Is Paige, qualified to make an arrest? Absolutely. Haven't seen her do it. I haven't seen the previous 3 SROs that I worked with do it. And I think it just speaks to that level of training they receive and them exhausting every resource they have. And majority of the time, you don't have to exhaust them. You can use those resources, and before you get to number 2, you've already have a student engagement, you have a family engagement, and you have whether it's counseling or some other service involved. So the student's not going through that whole juvenile, process.
And would you say, Principal Richard, that memorandum of understanding would be similar to what you would be asking for at the middle school?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, in my entire career, I know I don't need to, go back to what I spoke about last week, but I've never had a police officer or a SRO ever arrest a child in the school I've worked in, nor would plan to. I think what you're talking about is like an extreme case where someone might need to be hospitalized, and again, it wouldn't be arrest, it might be a PC, just for safety reasons, but I personally have never experienced that myself either, so.
Thank you.
Ms. Higgins?
Okay. I had one very intense personal experience with an SRO when I was teaching at Concord High. A fight broke out in my classroom. I was at my computer. My classroom was behind me finishing an exam. I turn around and two girls are just beating the crap out of each other. So being the foolish person I am, I stepped in between them, thinking I can get them to stop, and prying the fingers of one girl's hands out of the hair of the other. And the students are pushing the intercom, and it's like a comedy of errors. The principal at the time was like, "Hello, is everything okay? Come down here." And so the principal and the SRO came down. At that point, we had actually gotten one of the girls out into the hall, and the aggressor was on top of me, and we were on the floor. So that was quite an event. So of course there was in the whole process, our SRO really advocated for the girl that was the aggressor in the fight. There was a language barrier. There was just a cultural understanding of how you solved problems. It ended up going to court because I had a couple of injuries that required me to go to the doctors. Don't break up fights, just. In the court hearing, our SRO advocated strongly that this girl didn't deserve punishment. What she needed was education and support. And the whole thing was, and I testified the same way of, she didn't need to get in trouble. She understood at that point. It was the most amazing experience because you have an officer of the law with somebody that could have been arrested for something saying, absolutely not. This isn't a case where that would make the most sense for her. Years later, I ran into her at the beach and we had a big laugh about it. And she's sorry I hit you and blah, blah, blah. But to me, that illustrates this situation, that he could have very much carted her off, but he didn't. He really took care of her. And they had a pretty strong relationship at the end of it all. So that's just my share.
Mm-hmm.
And don't break up fights.
Ms. Robinson?
I'm going to let Ms. Boucher go first. I'm taking a lot of airtime tonight.
Well, so then my question would be back kind of to Barb too in that situation, is I'm trying to understand this, what is the difference between an SRO and a social worker? Why isn't, if the SRO is not making arrests for something that is an offense, that might be an arrestable offense, and we're trying to mediate it, every option before that arrest, then why aren't there other trained professionals that are trauma-informed who could do the same thing? Why in that situation did it then need an SRO? Why not a
My
social
opinion
worker?
would be that sometimes words coming from in a courtroom, a police officer might have weight in what he says or she says around the support of a student versus a social worker. That's just judgment that comes externally. I'm not saying one has more say than the other, but oftentimes perception is truer than true. And I also felt at the time it was to make positive connections with law enforcement so that kids just didn't think cops were all jerks that wanted to arrest them, that they would have a really good relationship with a police officer. So I feel the same way, and I think I actually had a long conversation on an airplane 2 weeks ago with an SRO at a middle school in Portsmouth, and he has a MSW as well as police academy, and he says he couldn't do the job he does without his social work background, that it makes it so much better. So you're right, what is the difference? Well, maybe ultimately there doesn't need to be a difference. Maybe one is just as good as the other. It's a really good conversation.
I mean, and from my perspective, I have a couple different ways of viewing it. One, it's another community partner in the building with an area of expertise to deal with extremely stressful situations. I have a number of very qualified counselors, social worker staff, but when an incident rises to a certain level, their ability to calmly, tactfully go at it, and they would say this themselves, is not to the level of a trained professional who's trained to be able to function to a high level of certainty and some stress. Some of the most stressful situations we can imagine. In addition to that, there is information shared from the SRO with us to help support students. If you experience potentially a domestic violence situation over the weekend, I'd be notified that we need to support you, not so much of the details or who's involved, that you would need some sort of supports to, at school, whether it be counseling, meeting with a social worker. If it was, a trauma thing, you might be meeting with a school psychologist. But I only know that because a police report to the juvenile department makes it to my SRO, who then comes down and shares this information with me, who then we're able to disseminate that to the counselors with their area of expertise. Now, our SRO spends a good chunk of time making sure they go through those juvenile reports, making sure we identify, because although a report comes in, it's not like, and I don't think that Concord PD has the time to do this, that they highlight each student who's involved in the type of situation, but Paige and prior to Paige, Felix, and prior to Felix, Brendan Ryder would go through that, identify what occurred, and come to our team, our MTSS Systems of Supports team, our school crisis teams, and talk to us about the services or the experience, not necessarily giving us details of who was involved, location, but the experience the student had and what kind of supports they were likely going to need before they could kick off their day and engage in academics. So there's another level of, that community partnership that comes into a huge play there. So I would just also say it's more than just social work. It's the ability to function in a high stressful situation, and in addition to that, the ability to have access to very important information on how we could support our kids.
I believe that the Concord Police Department recently hired a position to deal specifically with juvenile instances of interacting with the police department. It was all over my social media feeds that they've pulled on this new person who is well respected in the community. And if that position exists, wouldn't that person's role be to engage with school districts? Because if they're working in a juvenile capacity, that would mean that they would need to directly, work alongside all of our administrators. So I wonder if the creation of that position sort of nullifies the need for this. The reason I asked for this data is I'm really interested in the number of incidents as they correlate to populations at large within the district. So if we're looking at for total enrollments in Concord High School, we're looking at Black or African American is at 8.32%. But if we're looking at incidences, I'm looking at the new data. I jumped ahead.
Gotcha.
I'm sorry, folks. I'm
It's all right.
I'm absorbing as
Tell
much
us where
as,
you are, Sarah.
Yeah, so I am looking at underneath the demographics, which was very helpful. Thank you. I also want to acknowledge the very large amount of marginalized communities are also the ones experiencing the most food instability, which is, free and reduced lunch is our only qualifier for kiddos experiencing poverty in our district or in the state at large, because we don't have income taxes. So the information underneath the demographics shows enrollment totals for Renlet Middle School and Concord High School, as well as incident numbers. So if I'm looking at CHS enrollment 2021 to 2022, Black or African American student enrollment totals is 125 kiddos, which is 8.32% of the overall population at Concord High School. When I look at incidences, I'm seeing 11.31% interaction. So that's disproportionate to the population of kiddos that is represented in the high school. So that's where a lot of my concerns land is, are we disproportionately engaging with minority populations, which we know is a systemic issue that we deal with in our state and in the country? We are over-policing poor communities. We over-police Black and brown communities. I do not want our school district to be a part of our over-policing. So that's why these numbers matter. But as we're having this conversation, I'm also noticing that these incidents are protective custody or arrest, correct? And we're saying our SRO is not involved in protective custody or arrests. So is this data even relevant to the position at this point?
I mean, the SRO could be involved in protective custody, but we haven't had to do that. We've been able to call in an officer for support. We've also called in ambulance, etc. As soon as we call in a Concord PD for assistance, it's a documented case, right? Even if the student leaves in an ambulance.
Right, so, but what I'm saying is any of this data relevant to the need for an SRO position?
As far as arrest goes, Tim Herbert's personal opinion, no, because my SRO doesn't arrest students.
Okay, so then I guess if.
I think this is the data that we asked for.
It's the data that we asked for sure.
And-
And I appreciate that the school district keeps track of it, because not every school district does that. And I know that that is direct correlation to our dedication to DEIJB work in our district. I am not trying to make that seem less than. I know it's it's our number one priority in our strategic plan. Like, acknowledge that. We're one of 4 districts that employ a DEIJ director. It's a big deal. And at the same time, I'm having a really hard time in this argument understanding why it has to be a law enforcement officer. And Dr. Herbert, I hear you in saying there's a level of training that can make a person be more prepared for an intense situation. Well, does that mean that we actually just need to provide some better professional development for our existing social workers that will help them, you know, interact with intense situations in a more appropriate way? Or the next social worker that we bring on, we make specific training a requirement? I just still have such apprehension around systems that are broken or founded in white supremacist culture and still exist within those parameters, interacting with each other, when we've got all of our nursing staff saying, oh my God, I need one more person to help me. We have medically fragile children. That's part of our doctrine, or the mandate of public education is we must deal with the needs of those kiddos. It is not a mandate for us in public schools to invite law enforcement officials into our communities.
It's not a mandate that we invite social workers. It's not a mandate that we invite LADAC counselors, but we have them there because we see the student sitting in front of us today is complex with a variety of needs. If there was somebody with the extensive qualifications that comes with a well-trained SRO, law enforcement, the average patrol person on the street, I think, has a level of expertise that's not necessarily what we want in an SRO. An SRO is somebody who can engage with students, engage with families, and think of that MTSS umbrella. The reason these numbers are going down with suspensions and school suspensions and stuff, I estimate, is probably because of our PBIS systems and our MTSS systems of supports, where teams, which at the high school, the SRO is part of our team, we talk about the students, the complexity of their issues, or needs, I should say. It's not an issue, it's a need. And we make sure we have them with the right support so an incident doesn't occur. But, some of the information we gather, we're taking in, is coming from some of the incidents I shared earlier that we might get from an SRO outside of us. So, and so I just think we want, and I would not keep an SRO in my school if they didn't have that mindset. I would go to Kathleen, I would talk with Chief Osgood and say, this is not a good fit. I want somebody who's here to help us support students. I want somebody who's here to help us to be a resource for students, not somebody to do that. And I would say that's sentiments of the board and sentiments of Jay when I talk with him. We're not in the business of pumping students into the prison to school to prison pipeline.
And I don't want to suggest that you are.
No.
I hope it didn't come
But
across
no,
like that.
it did not. It did not. And I just I recognize the system you're talking about, that school to prison pipeline, and I agree with you. To the foundation of who I am, I'm against it.
I know.
And does it exist? It exists. The reality is the right person with those skill sets in a school can make a positive impact. And I think it's got to be the right person. Secondly, you mentioned earlier that the Concord PD hired somebody to be out and make connections in the community and with the schools. I certainly hope they come around and they do make connections and work closely with schools and get to know the principals. Pennacook has one elementary, middle school, high school. We have the high school, middle school. Five. How many elementaries now? Five, because you caught my joke there. So we have 5 elementary schools. But when you put it all together, I don't think one person could cover that and have the effectiveness when we have the person on site. I don't think that one person's going to generate the relationships that I have or have had with the SROs that have been at Concord High School in the past. Over time, maybe there is a way of or this SRO position be morphs into something else. Right now, the person with the area of expertise tends to be these officers with a highly set of trained skills, who really are student focused or juvenile focused, not for the point of incarceration or arrest, but for the point of, if you're going to change the community, make it better, you got to start with the youth. And that's, I think that's where, as long as I have that person in my building, I'm comfortable with it. If I didn't have that person in my building, I would be knocking on Kathleen's door pretty quick.
Okay.
Yep. Also, that individual, she's, I think the title is, I know she's a social worker that is a police officer as well, but she's actually going to be coming to our district on Friday for the interagency team meeting.
Okay.
So she'll be speaking there. I believe, Liz, you'll be at that meeting most likely. Are you on the interagency team?
I've been to the interagency.
Okay, great, yes. Well, yeah.
On it.
Okay, cool. I wasn't sure if you were on it or just visiting there, but either way, that individual will be there sharing.
Great.
They've only been hired probably for 2 months or so, probably.
Yeah,
so.
it's very, very new.
Yep.
So I'm not surprised that introduction, it takes a
Oh, yeah.
long time to introduce yourself
Whole
to
city,
a community,
yeah.
as I'm sure you're experiencing still.
Yes,
Yeah.
very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then just to touch on the school to prison pipeline, obviously that is a thing. But back to, the points I was making with, those levels of intervention. Paige, her goal is to make it so kids don't have to go to court.
Okay.
For whatever reason that is. There are multiple offenses that do occur that could, like I said, they just immediately, there's your ticket, go to court. And there's nothing that can be done once that happens. But if the intervention comes from an SRO on our end, then it looks different for the outcomes. So,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Thank you very much for.
I hope that provides you with the data you need to help you make that decision. That was the intent of it. You heard from our 2 principals, and I know that you have a lot to think about, but I wish I had answers for you, and there was grants, but.
Liz, do you have one more question?
I just have one more question. This is also going to the older members of the board, more senior board members.
Stop talking about me, I'm right here.
I didn't age, I meant who've been on the board
That
for
would
longer.
be.
When an SRO was added, in the year it was added to the high school, was it discussed to be added at Runlet at the same time?
So that was added long before we were on the board. When I taught at Concord High, there was an SRO. I went to high school with him. He was a few years behind me.
So you don't know what the conversation was?
No, I do not. And I know at that time, he was very involved also with the student assistance program. Do we even still have student assistance program?
We have services connected similar to that.
Yeah, so Runlet and Concord High, the student assistance program was in big communication, and the SRO was a huge piece of that, which again is the preventative piece. Get these kids connected. Like in my situation, that SRO sought that girl out and really developed a relationship with her. I do not remember any conversations on an official level about an SRO at Runlet, and in my years on the board, I don't.
It's come up from parents,
but
I don't think we've.
Huge community dialogue about the SRO a couple of years ago.
ago.
And there were parents who came to that and said they wanted one at Runlet.
Yeah.
So.
But
I'm including all that with this right now.
Yeah.
Like in my years before.
Can I also acknowledge, though, that we have not heard from any students during this debate about an SRO at the middle school. We did hear from students in the debate about an SRO at the high school, but I mean, we have to acknowledge the power differential that's existing. It sounds like it could be a relief for our administrators, but is that relief shared with the student body? I don't know that it is. Will that relief be shared with the kiddos who are disproportionately engaging with police officers compared to their peers? So that's like the crux of it for me, is this person intentionally, unintentionally, knowingly, unknowingly creating a healthier learning environment or not? Right, because that's our job, is to make sure that kids can learn and they have their needs met. I'm hearing about the needs of administrators being met, but I don't know that, and not every kiddo that interacts with the SRO on a regular basis is going to develop a relationship with the SRO on a regular basis. So there's just part of my social justice training, the work that I've done in DEIJ circles, that have really impacted my thought process about incorporating these individuals. And I will say, like Quincy, you have said to me, if it's an inevitability, then we can have control over who winds up in that space. But I would very much like to avoid this pairing up as much as possible and find alternative routes.
I just,
Sorry,
if
and
it's
that's
okay-
why we'll vote on this as a board and make a decision as a group.
just, I was gonna say, the 2 or 3 years ago, I believe that one, we didn't have middle schools. The high school students, very vast majority preferred, they were pro SRO. Of color and,
But you
because
also
the
have to
data.
recognize, like, how many kiddos
So-
are going to feel comfortable saying they don't want something in front of a room full of their principals
I
and
believe that
teachers
was, I
and
believe that was
parents.
a survey, a private survey, so.
Okay.
But I don't,
Even
but-
still.
But we did not do middle school kids in that time frame,
Mm-hmm.
so you're absolutely right, we didn't do anything with middle school kids.
Yeah.
It's okay if I just add one quick thing. When we talk about, again, a resource, when you talk about like an administrative, like, I don't see this as like Jay Richard needs to have this. I look at that like I kind of laid out in my memo last week. These are positive reasons why I think our school community would benefit from having a school resource officer. And I do think it's a fair question, like, you know, why not add another social worker or something like that? And the reality is, when we talk about diversity, you know, we want different types of resources for kids. You know, in my experience, we have middle school kids, they have been, for like attracted to, like, want to speak with a police officer. And again, it's like lower level things like, again, why you should wear a helmet when you ride your bike to school. It's like lower level type stuff. It's not about, you know, like arresting kids or, you know, creating a safer culture in the school. Those are positive impacts. Again, what I mentioned about SRO helping with like trainings and making kids more comfortable about doing evacuation drills and things like that. But again, it's like a resource, but it's a different type of resource where in my experience, many kids gravitate towards a school resource officer as, again, a resource in the school community, which is different than like a social worker, which works with a specific type of clientele for whatever reason. So it's like a whole school resource. I just want to share that, so.
Yeah, thank you for adding that.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll just say that I'm adding that to your plate for decisions that you all have to make, right?
Can I-
So
and
if
just
there's
for-
other information, though, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm going to send you the surveys, Sarah, that were done several years ago.
Yeah, thank you.
Just so you have that background.
Okay.
It's
I'll
like-
also add, Paige did say that she was willing to come here. Officer Salmon did say that she was willing to come here and chat with you all as well, if you need it. So that's a future thing.
Recap of
Thank you.
positions that we're looking to add this year. I'm seeing 1.5 nurses, 1 SRO, and 3 reading, math interventionists.
And 2 foreign language
2
teachers.
foreign language, that's right, thank you. Have I missed anything?
No.
Look at us wanting to have a healthy, smart district.
Right, that's right.
I love
It's
us.
good discussions to be having, and thank you very much for being willing to have the conversation. It means a lot.
Appreciate you.
Thank you. You're
Are
off the
you good
hook.
to move on, or do you want me
Yes.
to? Because I want to try to
Yeah,
live
oh,
by your
sorry, I'm writing
timeline.
it. Oh, yes.
So
sorry.
I think we could.
I'm not used to having the gavel.
Yeah.
It's a lot of power, Brenda.
Yeah. Please, move along.
Okay, thank you. One of the questions we had was contingency, so I have a contingency
Yes.
sheet for you.
Thank you.
So if I have somebody would be so kind as to pass these out to me. Jay, would you do the?
I know, is
know
this
you
your
would.
contingency fund, Kathleen?
What?
Is this the contingency fund?
Yes, this
Yeah,
is
okay.
what I was,
That was just a question from me.
oh,
so
well,
we can
I'm
just catch
sharing.
everybody up. I was just curious about.
yeah, no,
the-
that was a great question, I
Yeah.
thought.
So I had asked about.
Maybe I need clarification.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
So I noticed the amount that's in your contingency fund, and I had reached out to Jack to ask over the course of 10 years, if you have that data, how often is the contingency fund increased? And I had also asked how often was it used, to its full advantage, I guess.
Say that again, I can't.
How often was it used, like up to its limit?
Right,
So when we're talking about a very tight budget, if year over year you're only tapping into 50% of your contingency fund, regardless of the level it was set, then maybe it's a place where we could create some flexibility, not to take away from your contingency, but to maybe reassess the appropriate amount that could save us a little
Right.
money on the side.
Yeah, no, I get it. And Jack did give me it started out in 2011 at $152,466. And, the budget this year represents $368,000. So, that's double, right? And honestly, every year for the most part since 2011, it has grown. I don't see any place where it dropped down. So just in increments all the way up to 2025. What you have that I passed out, and I'm sorry for I couldn't figure out how to get that expanded for you, so I hope you can still read it, but I want you to see that's where the expenditures came this year. And right now, and I anticipate there wouldn't be any change to this bottom line right now, $90,000. I don't see me needing that, we're headed into the home stretch, as they say, right? With April right around the corner. So I anticipate that there wouldn't be any need for that. But you can see where that money was spent, a mentor stipend, this Concord High School mentor, those were for both the two new principals. I had a mentor, split that $10,000 for the year, and she meets with them and had a background in urban education, was a high school principal in an urban education, so she's been working with both of them. And the other beautiful part of this is that she not only meets with them individually, but she meets with them jointly, so now we have that connection, increased connection between the high school and the middle school, and I'm thrilled about that. But then there were some other things. A consultant was a request from professional development when we brought in James Moffett. Remember, James was our guest speaker at our workshop, so that's his fee. Then we had positions. Jess Knight over at Millbrook, we added, she was the only one that didn't have a full-time DSL, so we added .2. Kristen McDonald was a teacher from Krista McAuliffe that I didn't have it in the budget, but her numbers grew. Remember I showed you one year it was like 45, the next year it jumped to 60. So I had to put a teacher in there. We also, John had really talked about this position, Hannah Linquata, and needing to add additional time in the preschool. And so you see an increase in her time. She wasn't full-time prior to that. Foreign language has been a big issue, really trying to expand it, working harder to provide more opportunity both at high school and middle school. So Alice Tursky is, we added some time to her, and Catherine McDonough, who is overseeing as a coordinator for the program. So, and then the other one was a special ed assistant over at Abbott Downing. We also had some work that Kim needed around implementing EduClimber. You know that's our new system for holding all the data. We had a system. It was housed at the Department of Ed, but they dropped it. We had to pick it up. And then Schoology, which is the tool that we will be replacing all of the teacher ease and all the grades and so forth. So we've been working on that. Jen Susing happens to be the mentor, and I pay her mileage. We ordered lunar eclipse glasses for our elementary kids. We're really nervous about them.
Yeah.
I'm going to have a proposal for you around the day, that eclipse day, I've got to do something for that day. I'm
We
not
don't need any
suggesting that
kids
we
in the
drive
nurse's
to
office
Colebrook
with
to
sun
see it.
spots.
But I am suggesting that we do something as a district. And then last but not least, I supported Jim Corcoran being part of the a leadership academy that for aspiring folks who are looking to go into central office. You know, we have to create our pipeline. It's so weak, and so Jim, this is the last year that Jim's been in the program, so I supported that payment for that. So that's how it was spent this year. But pretty much, you know, that kind of plays out. Jack, I think, gave you some idea about what he's put in for this year, which was teachers, CEAA, along with educational assistants, as well as program assistant and a tutor. So those 4 positions are in there for next year.
In the contingency.
In the contingency, yes. And you know, I just checked with Michelle, you know, the nurse, full-time nurse would be about 117,000. That's what we put in for our teachers. So that's based on a Master's 5 step. And that includes benefits, Jim. So 117 when you're talking about the nurse. So even when I have a contingency for a teacher, it's when I really work to keep it no greater than Master's 5, if I possibly can. There are occasions when the principals will come to me because it's a physics teacher, a chemistry teacher. They're harder to find, and so if I'm going to be competitive.
Would that be the case with the foreign language teachers as well?
It depends, you know, we have some good resources in the area, and St. Mike's in Vermont has a wonderful language program, so we're going to be out scouting. It could, Brenda, certainly there's an advantage here in Concord because of your salary schedule is very attractive. And we have not had a difficult time finding teachers, as you know. Now, the support staff we have, like the paraprofessionals and the tutors, which has been the one, you know, John's shaking his head over there because it's been really challenging.
It's a hard
Anyway,
job.
that's the
It's a hard job.
contingency.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Will that 90,000 carry over? I'm sorry.
No.
No, or it goes back into the general?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back in, and, you know, when you make your final decisions at the end of the year, it's an unfund balance, and remember, you take your unfund balance and you can apply the balance to your trusts. So that's kind of where it goes.
Okay.
Some of it gets returned, but Jack, he'll talk about that, how he divides it all up. And that's pretty much what you've been doing traditionally.
Okay.
Barb? Oh, I thought you had a question.
Anything else?
I know we were going to talk about enrollment tonight, but do you want to add that on to Wednesday? Because Wednesday, you're going to look at your current technical numbers, the kids have all
Yep.
signed up for next year, as well as the high school numbers. Tim will join us, Ann will join us.
Feels like a natural fit.
It does seem like a fit. We have, you got your sheets that look like this, right? Not particularly that one, but I won't share that one. This one, you got sheets that look like that with and then down at the bottom, your policy. And I don't disagree with Brenda. You do have to think about your class sizes in terms of the challenges that our staff faces, just like the nurses. Is there anything else I can do? Don't ask me for particular numbers. I might be a little short on that, but
I can't think of anything.
I think,
was there anything else, Pam, that you wanted?
I don't think so at this point. All right, if seeing nothing else,
When would you like to talk about, can I talk about the eclipse next time at the board meeting on Wednesday for a few minutes? Because take some time, I'll send you some articles, okay?
Yeah, do you, I mean, you could talk about it right now if you
Well,
have
I'm
something
concerned about the
prepared.
timing of the eclipse. And the timing, it starts at 2:30, which is the dismissal time for our elementary kids.
How do you not
and
look
it
at the
goes,
sky?
What's that?
How do you not look up?
Yeah.
Right.
I know,
there's
but
an
we're
eclipse.
worried,
Yeah.
you know, elementary kids, you worry about them thinking, oh, I'll just look up, right? We have glasses for everybody. They're gonna have them, because not only do we have that Kim ordered, but we also got some from the Department of Ed, so we're gonna have plenty. So, the question is, it makes sense to me that I would release the elementary kids at 1 o'clock. That would give me, remember, high school and elementary get out at the same time, right? 2:30-ish, right? And then I would dismiss middle at 1:45, get them home before the 2:30 thing starts.
So we get all our middle school students home on buses within 45 minutes?
Pretty close.
We should double check
I'll double
that.
check with Terry. I
Because
talked
I
to Terry. I
feel
thought
like
he told me
we
that
might-
he told me that would be fine, but I will double check. I did have a conversation with him.
And actually,
Yeah.
you would want them in the
Yeah.
house, or,
I want him in the house. Here's
So-
the other question. We have after-school programs. So, 21C is willing to keep the kids there in school with their, under their supervision. But I don't have an answer yet. We've put calls into Boys Club and Y. So I need to check on that. But I need to get a message out if you all agree that
what's the date?
April 8th. I got about a month, little less than a month. So I need to get a letter out. I'd like to get a letter out by the end of the week, so parents have plenty of time to plan. Because, these early releases don't always go very well.
No.
History says.
I feel like if we're gonna do it, we should do 12:30 and 1:15.
Right,
You-
what's the
you wanna do it a
earliest we
little
can
bit
Can we do
release
the
them?
lunches by 12:30?
Yeah, we can get the lunches in earlier.
But you should keep in mind too, that the beginning of it, nothing happens.
No,
I
I'm
mean,
talking
it's-
about
it's-
Getting them on the buses.
Yes, is,
It's kind of why I said 1 o'clock, Bob, because I figured 2:30, it's just starting
It's just
to
starting.
just
It's not
start.
gonna
And it
really
really
take
doesn't, the
effect
full
until
effect
3:30 or
is at
4.
3:30. The full eclipse occurs at 3:30. I'll send you out some information. Kim's been the eclipse guru.
and are we gonna release the high school when we release the elementary?
Yeah, we always do anyway.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
go at the same time.
How are we gonna keep the school board from looking up?
Well,
Can we have some
I have glasses.
Please.
Okay.
I might need protective custody.
Because we'll do that just as much as an elementary.
Are
kid
you,
would.
are
By
we
the
like
way, the-
seeking a motion on this?
Well,
Is that-
the other districts around us are, everybody's, I have to tell you, everybody's doing this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I can
Is anyone
imagine.
taking
Nobody
the day
wants to have
off?
a youngster to go out and look at the sun and leave
So
from
I'll
school.
move that we authorize the superintendent to implement early dismissal on the day of the eclipse, April 8th.
I'll second that.
Thank
Second
you.
Moved by me, second by Ms. Higgins. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes.
That was easy.
There we go.
See, no
Thank
need to
you.
wait till Wednesday.
It's easy as.
I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Hastings. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Boucher. All in
All right, Liz.
favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank
No.
you, thank you,
All right,
thank you.
thank you.
Thank you all.